So in the book, you talk about Christianity being a worldview, and like we said, that's a big chapter, one that we did multiple episodes on because it's so important. And you talk about, and presuppositionalists point this out too, is that Christianity is a worldview, and to kind of section it off and say, okay, talk about the problem of evil, but you can't bring in other portions of Scripture. I just want to talk about God, killing these people, and so you only talk about that, or God and slavery. So why is it that the Christianity is this worldview idea rather than kind of what people think? Oh, it's just a religion. It's just these things that you have to believe. Why do you talk about it as a worldview, and why is it kind of wrong to isolate these parts?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is that while I think Christianity is a worldview, I wouldn't want anyone to come away thinking that Christianity is only a worldview. Right. And of course, we all recognize that, but I just want to head off that concern at the front end, that Christianity gives us a worldview. It defines a worldview for us. But of course, there's much more to the Christian faith than merely what we would call a worldview. But I think it's important to talk about Christianity as a worldview for a number of reasons. Because first of all, it helps us to recognize that Christianity is about everything. It's not just about a certain area of human existence, as though large parts of human life and experience and the things that we do can be understood independently of Christianity. And then there's some other stuff maybe to do with our spiritual aspect or something like that. And that's where Christianity comes in.
So it's more than Sunday from between 11 and 12.
Right. That'd be a good way to put it.
Good to know.
It's every day of the week. It's not just Sunday or some Sunday morning. And so it gives us an all-encompassing view of reality, of human nature, of how things began, of where they are headed, of what defines right and wrong, what defines human dignity, human purpose. It really is all-encompassing. Now, that doesn't mean that the Christian worldview, specifies everything about life to the last detail, but it does give us the most basic presuppositions, most basic foundational convictions on which we should. Everything else really follows, everything of importance. And so part of what I'm trying to do here when I talk about Christianity as a worldview is to counter the idea that Christianity is maybe just a sort of set of creedal claims or a way of life or a set of practices, but rather it's a way of seeing everything. And what's more, everyone has a worldview, whether they're Christian or not. This isn't something that's distinctive to Christianity. Islam has a worldview. Marxism has a worldview. Buddhism has a worldview. Now, to be more precise, there are different versions of each of these as well. So you can get different worldviews coming out of different understandings of these religions or ideologies. But they all make what some authors have called totalizing claims about everything, claims about what is ultimate. Claims that involve an authoritative sweep to them, to every aspect of human lives. And so partly what I want the reader to recognize is that none of us comes to the evidence. I mean, we want to talk about evidence when we talk about truth claims. We certainly want to talk about evidence for truth claims, but none of us comes to the evidence with a blank slate, or with just a neutral perspective. We're going to be bringing a worldview to that evidence, and it's either going to be a Christian worldview, it's going to be some form of non-Christian worldview. But what that means is that we can't just talk about evidence. Certainly we want to talk about evidence, but we also want to talk about the lens through which we view that evidence, the interpretive grid that we use to evaluate that evidence and trying to make sense of it and fit it into our belief system, or maybe allow it to challenge our belief system. And so I talk a little bit in the book about the relationship between worldviews and evidence, and that there's a somewhat complex relationship. But what that means is that when we're evaluating Christianity's truth claims, it doesn't make sense to isolate one of Christianity's claims and to evaluate it without any reference to anything else that Christianity might claim. For example, taking the existence of God and evaluating that without any reference to the doctrine of creation or the doctrine of the fall, how that's affected our knowledge of God, the doctrine of redemption. For example, in discussions of the problem of evil and whether the existence of evil and suffering is evidence against the existence of God, often that's treated in a very abstract way, as though all that's at issue is just some sort of narrow theism, fairly vague theism. Well, I would argue that if we're going to effectively address the problem of evil and suffering, explain why that doesn't give us reason to doubt the existence of God, we shouldn't be talking about some very generic, thin theism. Rather, we should be talking about biblical theism, and not just biblical theism, but biblical theism coupled with the entire storyline of Scripture, from creation through fall, redemption, consummation. Because the most robust answer to the problem of evil and suffering we can give is going to be one that draws on the entirety of God's revelation to us. I mean, why would we exclude any aspect of what God has given us, both in natural and special revelation, in formulating an apologetic response to the problem of evil and suffering? And what goes for that particular issue, I think, goes for other issues as well. So what I'm trying to do is say that whenever we consider the claims of Christianity, we've got to consider them in context and in connection with the other claims of Christianity, because it's actually the internal coherence and cohesion of the Christian worldview is one of the strongest reasons for embracing it and understanding how it makes sense of everything else.
So our message is more than just John 3:16, and especially as a Reformed person yourself, we always want to go, well, hold on just one second. Let me explain a few more things about John 3:16.
Yeah, I mean, I love John 3:16, but, in and of itself, I mean, you can't make sense of that verse without the rest of Scripture. You know?